Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast. I'm your host, Christian Harris, the founder of Slip Safety Services. My guest today is Kevin Robbins, who is a HSE director and also a fellow member of the HSE People Panel. We're going to be doing a bit of a mini-series of members of this panel, and there'll be some details of what exactly it is in the links at the bottom of the show notes. But there's a number of very eminent health and safety professionals, and we're going to be sharing some stories and some insights from them in the weeks to come, interspersed with some other guests and interviews as well. But yeah, that's just something that I wanted to make people aware of. Kevin, as you'll hear, is a very engaging guy, very experienced in the kind of construction world and super passionate about manual handling. So we talk quite a lot about that. We talk as well about kind of communication and how to quote unquote sell risk management, how to build relationships, how to ensure that there aren't any what I call vertical silos in businesses. So a very interesting conversation. We go into quite a lot of depth on some of those topics, and Kevin shares some great insights. So I'm sure you will enjoy this episode. I certainly enjoyed speaking to Kevin. So let's get on with it then and join my conversation with Kevin Robbins. Cheers. Kevin Robbins, welcome to the Safety and Risk Success podcast.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure. And you're the first of the kind of mini series that I'm doing with our fellow HSE People Panel members. So you're the measuring stick.
Yeah. So I have to see how far we're setting the benchmark then. Yeah, no pressure.
Everyone's now got to live up to this, so we better make this a good one. To start with, just something a recent success. How does it feel to get your triple ISO accreditation over the line?
It's something when it manifests itself like that. It definitely is a combination of several months worth of work. You're always kind of conscious because it's something that has been the main kind of focus of my work, my day job, since probably the last quarter of last year. So you're always kind of conscious, people think, what's he doing every day, or what's you sort of ferreting away in the background, and it's nice to actually get that where people can see, look, this is what we're working towards. But I mean, in all seriousness, it's been a pleasure to do as well. Obviously, it's hard work, but
yeah,
we've got a good team anyway, and everyone's really bought into it, and that obviously makes the job a lot easier. But to get there, that's what we're working towards, and it's just one of those kind of demonstrable benchmarks that everyone wants to kind of match yourself up against, and we're all about that continuous improvement, and obviously there's no better way to kind of show that. So yeah, very, very pleased, especially getting it over the line and where we are now.
Yeah, definitely. And you're quite new into this business, so was this one of the first things that you decided to crack on with?
Yeah, I mean, it's just coming up to a year now that I've been with the business, and it's one of the things that when I was speaking to the owner, that he said that he'd like the company to move into a certain direction and start kind of formulating a lot of the processes and whatnot. Generally you do find that when you've got a kind of medium-sized contractor, the stuff is there, the processes are there. It's just a case of kind of formulating it, organising it, and getting it where it needs to be. So, again, that's kind of half the battle. They knew where they want it to be and wanted to do the right thing. It's just kind of getting there. So that's definitely one of the main kind of medium to long term goals, if you like. And then obviously then a case of progressing it, managing it, and as the company progresses. So yeah, definitely that was the main focal point of it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And is that something that I should know this, but I don't? Is there like an annual then renewal of it, or does it last for a bit longer, or how does that work?
Essentially, your certification is on a 3-year cycle, and then you'll have what they have basically an annual surveillance audit. So that the first one's just so it's all done, and you've got plenty of time to do it within the 3 years. The next one, the initial kind of surveillance audit, will be 9 months' time.
Yeah.
And the amount of audits that you do basically is representative of the size of the business. So when we had our initial audit, it was head office and a kind of sample of operational sites. So it's essentially a 5-day audit, and then we'll have 2 audits a year, basically, for the next 3 years.
Okay, so just make sure you're staying on top of it and practicing.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
Good. Well, do you want to give the audience a quick bit of background on you then, in terms of, a bit of a career path and trajectory to get you to where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think like most people, when I was at school and growing up and whatnot, didn't grow up wanting to say I'm going to be a health and safety advisor and whatnot. It's one of those careers that when you speak to people, what you kind of seem to just find yourself in. But I was in the kind of the building merchant industry, so I've always been in and around the kind of the built environment and construction. So I was at the other end of the counter, if you like, and doing the selling and whatnot. Yeah. And the business that I was in at the time, they had a huge kind of emphasis on health and safety. Unfortunately, as a lot of them tend to be, it's kind of as a reaction to a couple of significant incidents. But that piqued my interest anyway, then, and there was, as I say, a lot more emphasis on an individual level. And it just kind of grew from that, from an internal perspective, being like a nominated kind of local safety champion, and progressing, that kind of way to a bit more regional. But there wasn't the scope there within the business to take something on full time. So then I kind of made the decision. I was conscious of doing it before I got too old as well, in terms of wanting to make a career change, if you like.
Yeah.
So it was that, late nights, weekends, self-study to kind of take the plunge, really, and then found myself working for a local health and safety consultancy. And that was brilliant, because it's a case of throwing in the deep end, really. You're exposed to so many different industries and whatnot. And I was very fortunate to have the managing director of the business. He's a well kind of renowned figure and does a lot of speaking for the Chartered Institute of Building, and he's a very knowledgeable man. So that was a great experience. I was quite lucky in that aspect to have that exposure. And then kind of progression, it then moved on to a more of a global multidisciplinary consultancy. And then the size and scale and nature of the projects was then a lot more kind of proportionate to the type of blue chip clients that we had.
Yeah.
But all along, I was always interested in being that kind of go-to person, a nominated person working for an organisation, a construction business, or whatever it may be. So in the back of my mind, I was always conscious of trying to work for a construction contractor.
Yeah.
And then that came in 2018. I was working then for the Lanes Group, and that was another great one. It's slightly a bit different, because it was asset management. It was working for London Underground, Transport for London and whatnot. So kind of, spreading the kind of experience and what I'm exposed to there. And then again, as bringing us to kind of where we are now, taking up position last year as the HSQE director of construction civil engineering business. So, I've been fortunate to, get nice, progressive positions, and being able to test myself and get involved in the kind of different areas, as it's got more and more involved in the environmental and the quality side of things in the last couple of years, especially. Yeah. Obviously, with that, the big emphasis on the ISO management systems and whatnot. So that's brings us to where we are now, and obviously getting into the kind of the exposure and your interest into things such as the HSE People initiatives.
Yeah, no, it's great. Interestingly, you started off, you said, on the sort of salesy side. I mean, to what extent do you think that's been helpful in your health and safety career? The kind of communication skills and the ability to pitch, an outcome to other people to try and get them on board to something.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think I was working in industry for about 8 or 9 years, and what I kind of told myself, if I'm able to sell something to a builder or a construction company that are notoriously kind of scrupulous with their money, and then you can definitely gain yourself some stakeholder buy-in. So that's definitely helped and not hindered. I've got to say, it's because you're dealing with different types of people all the time, and it's great from that perspective, and also from then moving into the more health and safety orientated kind of positions within that. It was still a relatively new idea, and it wasn't only just getting the staff involved in that, but also the customers and the clients as well onto our premises and whatnot. It's definitely, you come into all the different realms then of the the generational views of how things have just moved on. So yeah, that was challenging in itself, but definitely, set me up in good stead for the career that I was about to take on anyway.
Yeah, and it's always an interesting thing for me to think about, because I'm very specialist in what I do in safety, obviously, but I'm not a trained health and safety person, but I've got more of a commercial sort of background, so I've kind of come at it from that way as well. And it's always just interesting to think about, how you influence people and how you get things done, I suppose, because that's what it's all about at the end of the day, isn't it?
Well, it is, and I think one of the key things from my background is that it was always being able to, the expectation was there anyway, to be able to build relationships with people. So that's definitely a key part of it. So yeah, as I said, that's definitely a valuable question, and it's something that, as I said before, it's not something that a kind of career that we all tend to go in sort of first time, but you can definitely use the skills and experience that you've got from your kind of primary career, if you like.
Yeah.
It's interesting, as you say, with everyone's got their own little story. So yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So tell us a bit about the Manual Handling Foundation.
Yeah, so it's something that's kind of very much in its infancy. I still don't quite know yet in what kind of form it's going to take. I mean, I'd like it to potentially be a kind of a community interest group or a charity ultimately, because there's definitely a gap there for a kind of a purposefully dedicated kind of manual handling and musculoskeletal disorder awareness group, if you like. It's very much something that it's obviously prominent in any kind of working life, workplace or industry or whatever it may be. And I definitely feel there's a focus there for it still. It still forms large percentages of workplace ill health and absences and whatnot.
Yeah.
But as I say, there does tend to sort of be a gap there in a kind of a collective, or as I say, whatever kind of form or platform that there is to get something going. So it's something that I'm kind of working on in the background. Got bits and pieces together with a LinkedIn page and whatnot. They're very keen to get some other individuals involved, but from all kind of different walks of life as well, not just health and safety practitioners, but people that have got the kind of necessary sort of skills or connections or experience or whatever it may be, just having the passion for it as well. I mean, because that ultimately it's something that we're kind of doing in our own time, and it's something that you have to really be that way inclined to want to be a part of that. But it's something that's been a kind of key part of my life for the last kind of 5 or 6 years now anyway, is helping out with non-profits. So it's definitely something that I'm passionate about anyway.
Yeah, I mean, if you look across pretty much all sectors, number one and number two is always going to be manual handling or slips and trips, isn't it, in terms of accidents and claims costs. So
that's right.
Two big issues. And do you find, one of the things I find with slips and falls is that there's this kind of misalignment or misperception between kind of how big a problem it is, but actually on the ground in an individual business, the fact that they might only have an accident every couple of years and a claim every 3 or 4 years, and so therefore they kind of think, well, we're probably doing okay, or it's not that relevant to us. But obviously you multiply that single business unit by the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, and then that's when you start getting up to £1 billion of claims. Is there sort of a similar thing with manual handling, where there's maybe not as much understanding or kind of keenness to do stuff about it at a local level? Is that one of the challenges?
I think it is, and I think it's a case, and like with anything, it is a case of educating. But I don't think that people see the severity of it. I think it tends to be how someone might have put their back out, and it may be a very kind of short-term thing. You've got to pull the muscle and whatever it may be, but there hasn't been a great deal of awareness in terms of case studies of the long-term health effects of this kind of thing. And I think it's only really as well with the kind of the huge push and the much needed push that we've had in the kind of mental health arena, where that's obviously a huge part of general workplace absences and whatnot. This is ultimately what's affecting productivity, what's affecting, in terms of this kind of culture, if you like, but the huge increase in absenteeism anyway. It does go hand in hand with not only mental health but physical health and what it seems to be. And I think you raised that key point there in terms of it may be maybe a small-minded sort of thought to it from an organisational individual perspective. Oh, maybe it only happen, once or twice every kind of year or so. But it's definitely that kind of, when you see the bigger figures from an accumulative perspective, clearly a lot more work there to be done.
Yeah, and it's the big challenge, I suppose, is that I can fully understand that perspective. Like I can see how if you were in that position, you wouldn't think it was a huge problem for you. So it is a difficult nut to crack, isn't it? Because you can't be overly sort of laborious or asking people to do stuff that they don't feel is going to be of benefit to their business, I suppose.
Yeah, I think everyone's always kind of conscious as well of not reinventing the wheel, and I think it's just a case of really it's just a case of reviewing what you're currently doing, and sometimes it may only be minor kind of tweaks to the current methodologies or processes that you have. Sometimes, unfortunately, it may be unavoidable, but are we really, can we all be true to ourselves and say that we're making every reasonable effort to be avoiding manual handling, or ultimately then the associated health risks that come with that? It's definitely a case of more productive kind of planning of work, and something I'm kind of quite passionate about as well is this kind of sharing of information, not being kind of protective of it. If there's information there that's useful to another organisation or whatever it may be. So I think that'll also be something that kind of goes hand in hand with what I'd like the MHF to be about. Have that kind of community access to information. You can interpret it and obviously use it in however is more applicable to your organisation, your industry. But yeah, it's as I say, we can make as much of this as we like as well. That's what I like with the kind of idea that we have. As I say, very much in its infancy, but there's no telling what kind of direction it can go down, really.
Yeah, it's interesting. Your point about sharing data is key as well. And I mean, I've sat on the cleaning industry health and safety forum, CSSA, and I've joined the UK Active, the kind of fitness industry health and safety forum meetings a few times as well. And it's interesting where you've got very competitive industries, but when it comes to safety, because it's kind of not, it's not a trade secret, it's not about sales, and well, it is actually when you follow it through logically, but it's not perceived as being about sales and things like that. People are much more open to sharing, which is good, and but then it's about going that stage further and maybe not just sharing the data, but trying to share some of the insights and the best practices and try to have a holistic approach to really solving the problems, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah, and that's why I feel there's kind of great potential there with it. As I say, it's definitely an area and a kind of field of occupational health that is in much need of attention.
Yeah, no, I agree. And also, I think anything, whatever field of safety you're involved in, it's like I don't have people only talking about slips and falls on my podcast, because actually to me it's about, I always think about raising the level of the sea, and then that raises the level of the ships for everybody, if you know what I mean. So the more we can talk about the benefits of reducing risk and preventing accidents and reducing claims costs, whatever those are, then that's going to be good, because that changes people's mindset to being more preventative, more proactive, and then there's going to be improvements across the board. Yeah,
no, absolutely, and I think that is key. And unfortunately, there's always been that kind of perception in kind of times gone by where organisational leaders are only kind of bothered when it's the kind of pocket that's affected and whatnot. But I do think there has been a huge shift in the mentality anyway. But obviously, it's a case of you do have to constantly be looking at different ways of approaching it. Making sure that organisations have that kind of top-down approach and that everyone's very transparent and bought into the idea.
Yeah.
But it's not restricted to any one kind of discipline. As you say, every organisation, the job that we do is very relevant to many organisations and many industries. It's just obviously a case of reviewing, because the way that information is interpreted or delivered or how it's conveyed to the workforces will have to be a lot more kind of targeted, in order to maximise the effect.
Mm-hmm. You raised an interesting point, which I was going to ask you about around sort of culture and top-down approach and stuff. So let's park that for a second. Just finish off on the Manual Handling Foundation. If people are interested to learn more or to get involved, firstly, I'll have a think about if I can think of anybody, which I'm sure I will be able to. But if people are tuning in, what's the best way of getting in touch with you to chat about
that? Yeah, I mean, so I'm quite prominent on my LinkedIn. I'm on there all the time. So there's not many Kevin Robbins out there in terms of the health and safety industry, so it'd be pretty easy to find on now. At the moment, we've just got quite a modest Gmail account, which is the Manual Handling Foundation at gmail.com. Also, so if anyone wants to directly send anything through there to me, and same just with direct messages as well on LinkedIn. That's kind of where we are currently with that.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, I'll well, obviously when we publish this, we'll mention that as part of it, but I'll have a think. There's a few people that come to mind actually that that might be good to get involved. So yeah, we'll see what we can do to help with that. So yeah, you mentioned about how to kind of get that safety message flowing through the organisation, and what's your views on the best way of doing that, and does that vary by size of company?
I feel that it does, yeah. I mean, what I've kind of noticed that, when I took on the position that I'm currently at last year, it's something that I purposely wanted to do, because I was working for a PLC, a national business, ultimately, and I think it's no kind of secret. Well, obviously, the kind of the smaller the organisation that you're part of, you feel that you can put your stamp on something a lot more. You feel that you're a bit more involved, and that your effect is have a lot more of a demonstrable effect within the business. And where it was kind of half the battle for me, it was made a lot easier because the fact that it was one of the key points that the business wanted to do. But in terms of the approach, and how we go about it, I still have to make sure that the other members of the leadership team are actively involved in it and actually buy into that, because, inevitably there were areas that needed probably bringing up to the expected standard because they just wouldn't have been aware of it beforehand and whatnot. Yeah. So it's just a case of, process and map planning, and looking at what it is that we need to be doing. But it's no kind of great secret. It has to come from the very top and be seen that everyone has that true intention of wanting to do the best thing. And that comes from continuous improvement, just asking ourselves constantly, how can we do things better? Are there any rooms for improvement, whatever it may be? So it's just simple things that we've introduced as well, which is also forms part of the ISO requirements in terms of projects that we've just finished, sending out client questionnaire surveys and whatever it may be. And that has a heavy focus as well on HSQE in terms of interaction, communication as well. Please be brutally honest with us. Is there anything that we could have done better? Yeah. And we'll try to introduce as well now, because it's relatively new, we haven't got a lot of working examples of it. But we always have a pre-start meeting, for instance, anyway, for any kind of new jobs and projects. But with kind of progress meetings and what we're intending to do with projects that are then handed over, we'll have basically a meeting, and we'll start to talk about not only what went wrong or what could we have done better, but what did we do well? There's always that emphasis on, or maybe this wasn't quite where it should have been or whatever, and obviously that's a key part of continuous improvement. But we need to also focus on the areas that we are good at, and accentuating our strengths that we have. So it's very much kind of just opening up our minds to that a little bit more. Doesn't have to be very prescriptively process driven. You can obviously have a bit of outside the box thinking with it, and very much kind of open to ideas. And as in terms of the guys that you've got, the guys and girls working on the ground level, they're your shop floor. It's that engagement with people as well. In terms of everything from the selection of tools to the the welfare that we're using, or whatever it may be. You're the people that are using it day in, day out, or in terms of ways of working, or paperwork, documentation processes, everything like that. And there's been some little success stories that we've had out of that already as well. That there's just been some better ways of working. Yeah. And I just think that a lot of the time people seem to think that decisions made in the boardroom, we're rolling this out, let's get on with it, and it just doesn't work. it has to be, everyone has to feel part of that, and to say that, yeah, I had that idea, I know that works, or everyone's open to the idea of whatever it may be. And people naturally buy into that more because they felt the process from the start. So, if you break it down like that, really, it's not that hard, it's not that complicated to understand that it does work.
Yeah.
But it's just, you do have to kind of, I suppose, from organisations or individuals that haven't really been exposed to that, to a certain extent, maybe it is a little bit of a leap of faith. But it does work, and we're seeing great successes with it already. So I can definitely vouch for it.
Yeah, that's good. I mean, going back to bigger companies, when I've been helping some very big companies, one of the things that I see is that there's often a disconnect, as you say, that there's this kind of, at the top, it seems that they are focusing on this and they're saying the right things, but then as you start to go down through the organizational layers, and it's particularly bigger companies where it's more kind of hierarchical, you end up having scenarios where, one example in a nightclub, big part of a big chain, the manager had been there for 15 years or something. She knew that building inside out. She knew what worked. She knew what didn't work. And there was a particular spill mat sort of system that she knew worked for her in her building, but it was relatively expensive. It was 20 quid, whatever. But these things add up, and she was prevented from buying these things by some kind of regional manager who's driven by the P&L. And so then you kind of have that disconnect. You've got the shop floor, for want of a better term, wanting to focus on safety, the board saying safety's a big priority, but then sometimes these things get lost in translation in the middle. Any experience of things like that, or how to overcome that sort of challenge?
Yeah, it definitely does. I think it's very easy for information in the message, because it's not to say that, I think, as you quite rightly pointed out there, at the senior leadership teams and the board levels, the intention is there, but you don't know how much that message is getting diluted as it starts going down. I always kind of liken it to, in a large organisation, it's like turning the Titanic, in terms of, it's, you don't quite know how long it's going to take, if you're even going to get there, and how many pairs of hands or computer screens it's got to go through in order to actually action something or make a decision or whatever it may be. You think that in the grand schemes of things as well, with that example that you raised there, it probably would have saved money in the long run by just putting a bit of faith and trust in someone that in their locality, they know that premises or their work function inside out. I know that this will work. Let's just do it and sign off on it. And I do find that I've had that, previously. It can be very, political and bureaucratic, and you end up talking about things and having meetings about meetings. And I think it's very easy to kind of get carried away with that. And I used to get very frustrated with that, that things just didn't get done, and people forget a lot of times it's job justification. It's other kind of little politics that come into it, because there are a lot of middle managers involved, and people want to have their say and their piece that may not have been involved in the original message that's come from the board level, whatever it may be. And there is that kind of disconnect, especially when you have kind of divisions and regions within a PLC company and whatnot. Obviously, you want to try and have a bit more of a kind of, a message that's consistent across the board, but some things don't work everywhere, and it's that kind of that connection. I think sometimes they lose it. Sometimes it's a case of, we're doing it this way, and let's just kind of keep with it, kind of thing, and possibly even knowing it's not going to work anyway from the start. But it's just very difficult to kind of see that through. So you very much have to. It's still possible, and that point that you've raised, you have these local experts, you have these people that have got the knowledge, that have been doing the job for X amount of years, or whatever it is. Use them people, just, and have an effective way that you can communicate with these people, because it happens a lot, unfortunately.
Yeah, you've hit a nerve there with meetings about meetings, because I think people just don't. One of the big challenges I think is, and one of the key areas where companies can improve is understanding the total cost of risk. So that's one example there, where you've got something which is kind of trivial in the grand scheme of the size of that business, but then you start having meetings about it and meetings about meetings, and you start adding up all the cost of doing that. For example, people should be doing, as a small business owner, I focus on doing the £500 an hour jobs. If I'm doing a £10 an hour job, that's irresponsible use of my time and my business's capital and whatever. And you start to think about all of those hours and hours spent in meetings and stewing over things and what that's actually costing. And you think, well, you could have bloody spent 50 quid on your spill mat, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And you and I both know that, but unfortunately that still does happen. I've been in many a boardroom when you're looking around and there's 25, 30 people in there from various different organisations, but like the actual decision makers as well, from many kind of subcontractors and whatever the kind of format may have been. We've got the facility right here to be making decisions, but we're not. What's going on here? It's just it baffled me, but it's that's definitely one of the advantages of the kind of the SMEs and the you're actively driving that, and by using the experience like that I've been involved in, that I know how wrong it can go and how you are just not having the best use of and having productive time, so it's
because with manual handling, just like with slips and falls, it's actually it's arguably not so much if we're thinking financially, there's obviously the human cost on top, but if we're thinking about the insurance claim cost, actually that's probably not that big, but it's all the hidden costs on top of that, isn't it? And all the opportunity costs and all these other things that the business is missing out on that people I don't think really grasp. And if they did, I think they would make much different decisions around what they're doing on safety and be much more proactive and be much better. That's my view anyway. Yeah,
absolutely. And obviously with some organisations, you have to sort of look at it as a case by case basis. I've worked in industries where it's asset management. We're working on London Underground. You have a 5-hour window overnight to get work done. You have to carry all of the work down to the station platforms or whatever it may be. Sometimes it is kind of unavoidable, but there are still, you can constantly ask yourself, is there a better way of doing this, or whatever it may be. It's just, re-energizing that. And, there are obviously a lot more kind of automated ways of doing things now, and especially within kind of, manufacturing and, logistics environments and whatnot, the use of mechanical aids is it's the default. So I do think, especially in construction, when you've got the movement of materials, deliveries been, unloading and loading of deliveries, all that kind of stuff. I think with a bit more forward planning, there's a lot of that accumulative manual handling that an operative is doing throughout the day that can be significantly reduced.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting, we were chatting before we started recording, and because we both just had our first COVID vaccines, and we were sort of saying that sometimes in safety, when things aren't happening, that's not good, because you then get the questions about, well, why are we spending money on this and why are we investing time in that? Whereas it's only when things go wrong that the costs kind of come to the forefront.
Yeah, exactly that. As I think I mentioned before, maybe in a certain extent, if things have always been going well and you're very good at your job, for instance, or whatever it may be, there's not a lot of bad news going on. Maybe you'll never really get the kind of true reflection of the the success that you're having. And I think, as you mentioned before yourself, in terms of if there's maybe a bad culture or there's been poor performance with regards to accident statistics or whatever it may be, and there's been a demonstrable improvement in that, then obviously you've got something to measure against. But we're just that kind of we're the unsung heroes, maybe.
Yeah. Have you ever read the book called The Power of Habit?
No, I can't say I have. No.
There's a chapter in there. It's all about how habits can drive performance in sport and business and whatever. But there's a chapter in there about a business called Alcoa, which is often cited as an exemplary case of investing in safety. It's a good book, but the principle was that this guy Paul O'Neill took over as CEO, and he stood up in his first shareholders meeting. And rather than talking about profit and margin and blah, 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 he basically said, I intend to make Alcoa the safest company in America. And he was CEO for 15 years. And I've spoken to people that worked there when he was there. And the company, the culture absolutely lived and breathed it. So it was safety first, absolutely. And the point was from him that this was safety then became this kind of rallying force that everybody could buy into and everybody understood and everybody benefited from. And so if you can get everybody working together in one direction on safety, then they'd start by inference, they'd start working together and pulling in one direction on other things as well. And he was there for 15 years, and over that 15 years, their safety performance, which was already good, improved by, I think, 90% if you look at sort of injury rates and time off work and serious injuries and stuff. And their profits went up by 7-fold during the same time. So that was a great example of where actually, yeah, if you do implement it and you do live it and breathe it, it really works.
Yeah, exactly. People, there's that kind of misconception that, safety has to be expensive. But then there's that old saying there, if you think health and safety is expensive, then you try an accident.
Try an accident, yeah. Try an accident. Yeah, no, exactly. So HSE People Panel, we're both members. How have you been finding it so far?
Yeah, I think it's been great. I think we've got a great kind of a bunch of people that's involved, and I think that the participation has been very good. And obviously, what's led us, how we've already discussed with the manual handling, that focusing on that kind of area first was prompted initially by a poll that I put out on LinkedIn. Obviously, just trying to see, generally what the subscribers and what the people in the community actually wanted to speak about first. So obviously, it led us to manual handling. I think it was 55% of the votes from over 600 votes.
Yeah.
So it was pretty kind of conclusive, really. And that's what kind of sparked it from my perspective as the occupational health member. And obviously still early days, but I think there's a lot of good ideas being thrown around, and with regards to some more areas that we can focus on with engagement and whatnot. But it's an exciting place to be. I'm really enjoying it, I must say. It's great.
Yeah, it's good. I think it's been good to just, we've got a little WhatsApp group and just to kind of get to know people as well, and sort of share ideas and collaborate a bit, I think is always a good idea too.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, because obviously, everyone's got, very different backgrounds and whatnot, and it's good to have that kind of, an independent sounding board as well. Everyone's got their own little, takes on things and their personalities that come out in it, and that's what's great about it as well, because obviously that's something that can get lost in translation a lot of the time. You get a lot of safety messages that are thrown out there, and unless people are kind of posting videos, you don't always kind of get the personality behind it, and that there's still to a certain extent that kind of stigma that's attached to the industry. We are like everyone else. We're just trying to make sure that everyone goes home safe at the end of every day.
Yeah. I organised a roundtable. This is probably about 2 years ago now, of kind of safety and risk leaders. We had insurers and cleaning companies and PLCs, and I think there was about 20 people there, and we spent a lot of time talking about costs and claims and all this stuff. And then actually about halfway through, somebody raised a really good point, which is, well, hold on a sec, we're talking all about all this quantifiable stuff, but fundamentally, as you just said, it's all about getting people home safely. And the key finding, I suppose, that we all agreed on from that was, we need to focus more on the people side of things, and perhaps a bit less on some of these financial aspects.
Yeah, and I think it's very easy as well. I think, especially with a lot of the larger organisations and the tier 1 contractors, I think that they, by default, they find it's easier to deliver a message by creating a kind of a slogan and a bit. Sometimes it comes across as a bit of a gimmick, but I mean, you've got obviously the whole zero harm initiatives and whatnot. But the aim of the game, as we've said, is just about showing the people that you genuinely care, that what's more important than anything is that you get home in the same condition as what you started.
Yeah.
It's very easy to, I think, to get sort of caught up with the initiatives and the slogans and the different kind of logos and campaigns and whatnot. But I think sometimes that does kind of detract from it a little bit. You need to strip that back a little bit, really. And I think that's a great example we said about that book. It's what better way is there to kind of demonstrate that? You know, you've got the CEO that's walked in, that's the first thing that he said, and everything else looks after itself.
Yeah, and it's interesting because if you look at all of the research around the jobs market, and I think COVID's kind of highlighted this even more regarding like work-life balance and working from home and stuff. But people don't actually, when you really ask them about it, they don't really care about salary. Salary is not their number one, and money is not their number one thing. It's actually that they've got a workplace that cares about them and looks after them. And I think that was the beauty of Alcoa example, was actually, well, we're gonna do that, and then what you get from that is you get huge improvements in performance and productivity from the team. And so, you know, the investment in looking after them is multiplied by them, you know, being happier, staying in the job longer, doing a better job, being more productive, etc., etc. So it really is, you know, I think something that people should be looking at more strategically is that well-being piece. But, you know, let's try and put some tangible outcomes on it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's the way of the modern world now. You know, the kind of, you know, traditional 2.4 children family setup and all that kind of thing. You know, the modern world is very different now. Things are very, you know, instant. You've got to work around different things and whatnot. And I think that people have that kind of subconscious anxiety and stress about, or, you know, I need to do this, or whatever it may be. Everyone's got commitments. Everyone's got things that needs to be going on or whatever. And if they feel that, you know, an employer is going to be on their case about, you know, whatever it may be, and you think on the grand scheme of things, everyone's going to get the work done. You know, you have your kind of quota, whatever it is that you're doing. But that's been definitely one of the things that's come out of this, is that I'd be interested to see actually if there'd be any kind of study in terms of, you know, productivity and output levels, as opposed to previous years where everyone was in 5 days a week in the office and all that kind of thing. Because people have just made it work. It's been a case of having to, you know, and much of it has been taken offline and remote and all this kind of stuff, and, you know, cutting down commute times and wherever it may be. And, you know, everyone got over that initial kind of, you know, the technical glitches and the Zoom wonders and whatnot. But everyone's kind of been on this journey together, haven't they? So it's, you know, there's definitely some interesting insights to take out of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Great. Well, Kevin, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a really great conversation. If people want to get in touch, you mentioned about the manual handling, but is LinkedIn just generally, if people wanted to have a chat with you, the best way to contact you?
Yeah, by all means. Yeah, LinkedIn. You know, I'm on there checking all the time, and I've got other bits and pieces going on, with always looking out there to help mentor, you know, aspiring health and safety professionals or whatever it may be. But yeah, for whatever reason it may be, with the Manual Handling Foundation and just generally connecting, that's what the platform is all about, and sharing information and helping. By all means, please do.
Definitely. Great. All right, Kevin. Well, thanks very much. Really appreciate it, and look forward to continuing working together as part of the HSE People Panel.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks a lot, Christian.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye-bye.